Welcome back. It is almost time. In the next few minutes, Donald Trump will step into the White House Rose Garden and announce his latest round of trade tariffs. The Trump administration has promised a major announcement, one that will go down as one of the biggest moments in modern American history. Countries across the world bracing themselves now for an economic shock. But the size and the scale of this wave of tariffs has been well guarded. Well, Trump has billed it Liberation Day, an opportunity for the United States to address and rebalance trade deficits globally. To Donald Trump, the winner is the nation which exports more than they import. America imports $3 trillion worth of goods. It will, in his eyes, help rebuild American industries and revitalise manufacturing. Many economists doubt his methods, though, and have warned that tariffs will only serve to raise inflation and hit American consumers. So, will it prove to be an act of self-preservation or an act of self-harm? And what consequences will there be for the global economy? Well, let's bring in our US correspondent now, Mark Stone, who is at the White House for us. The world speculates and waits, but they've kept it close, Mark, and tonight putting on quite a show. What can we expect then?
A show, I think, for sure. Donald Trump likes to seize the moment, seize the limelight. He likes the world's eyes to be on him, on this building, and so it is tonight, just coming up to 10 to 4 here in Washington, D.C. And there is the live shot, our first glimpse of what the Rose Garden looks like as we await the president to take to that podium. I was not aware of what this was look like. We're not in there, as you can see, but the media are beginning to gather in the Rose Garden for Liberation Day, as he is describing it. You can see the stars and stripes, the flags obscuring the walkway there. Behind that is the West Wing and the Oval Office, where Donald Trump, along with his trade team, have been locked in last-minute negotiations, last-minute discussions, putting the final touches to the centerpiece, really, of his economic policy. And it is remarkable. We were just discussing it here before you came to me, how extraordinary it is that not only that nothing has leaked, really, but that no one has any sense quite of the detail of what will be announced. Under normal circumstances, when a trade policy is going to be shifted so fundamentally, there would, for industry here and abroad, be some sense of what they can expect so that they can prepare. But not so with Donald Trump. He wants it all to be a surprise. He wants to keep everyone guessing, and he wants his moment. And I think, you know, as Britain and so many other countries around the world have tried to do what they can with their own individual relationships with Donald Trump. Britain, of course, has the so-called special relationship. They have tried to find ways to carve out deals in the weeks running up to this day. But it appears as though they have failed. Will it be a tiered system? If it is, then hopefully for Britain they will feel that the relationship is so close, that the trade relationship is relatively good already, relatively low barriers, that they will be low in that tier system. But I think we should see Liberation Day, Anna, as kind of the beginning of a process. I think foreign governments have come to the realization that Donald Trump will have his moment, and then be after today, when there is a clear sense of precisely what all this means for different countries around the world. Only then will they be able to begin in earnest with plans that they have in place, with proposals that they've tried to put under Donald Trump's nose. But, you know, even within the Trump orbit, it is so difficult often to get to him. You're dealing with the people around him who themselves don't necessarily know where he will land on certain issues. I should stress, just before you leave me, is the fact that in America it is true that this is deeply divisive. Chuck Schumer on the Hill, the minority leader, said today Donald Trump will take a sledgehammer to the American economy and the American dream. With the flick of a pen, he's set to unleash a reckless tsunami of tariffs. Prices will rise on medicines, cars, homes, appliances, metals, paper products, beer, lumber, fertilizer, and the rest of it. So domestically, this is divisive. Internationally, it is worrying so many people. Donald Trump, though, and those around him believe himself believe that this is the moment he can make America's economy, America's industry great once again.
Don't go away, Mark. Stay put. I just want to bring in our economics and data editor, Ed Conway. I know you've got charts going back to the 1700s. You've shown them to me. So give me some scale here. Just how big is this likely to be?
It's potentially an enormous moment, Anna. I mean, looking just at the size of the trade barriers that America has had in place in the past. Look, I'll show you here. I think we can show them on the screen here. We are talking... The whole story of the past kind of 70 years has been that line, which is American tariffs and just how high they are, going down and down and down and down. And what Donald Trump is already doing is lifting that line up. OK, so look at just how that has started to go up because of the tariffs that are already being imposed on steel, on aluminium, on China. But depending on what we hear about in the next few minutes from Donald Trump, that line could go stratospheric, potentially. We just don't know because we don't know the scope and the size of these tariffs. But that could go to extreme levels, potentially. And it is historic. That's a historic moment that we are potentially witnessing right now. But it's also a historic level of uncertainty. No one knows precisely what the White House is going to do. There's a reason that they've chosen to have it late after markets have closed, because this has been so closely watched by investors. And we are going to be kind of trying to focus on both the numbers but also why it's happening. And in terms of why it's happening, what matters for us is that one of the things that Donald Trump has talked about is this idea of reciprocal tariffs. Reciprocal tariffs, the idea being that other countries around the world have a certain level of trade tariffs against America. America has, in most cases, lower levels. And the point that Donald Trump has wanted to make is we're going to even that out. So we're going to have the same kind of level of tariffs against you as you have against us. But if you look at those differentials right now, yes, India has high tariffs versus America. So that's just showing you the difference between other countries and the US. India has high tariffs. Vietnam, pretty high tariffs, although they've started to bring them down just in the last few days. But the UK has actually lower tariffs than America has on us. The difficulty here is we're not entirely clear. In fact, it seems likely that the US and the White House is not focusing on this. They're not just focusing on this, they're focusing on other measures of what they see as trade barriers. And one thing they have said that they think is a trade barrier is VAT, value-added tax. For us, and for almost everyone out there in the world, they would see that as, no, that's just a tax, it's kind of a sales tax in this country. But for a lot of people in the White House, they think it's a trade barrier. And if you add on that trade barrier, then just look at what happens to these bars. Suddenly, it looks like everyone is massively protectionist against America, and that then it provides the justification for the White House to be imposing the big tariffs that we're expecting to hear about. So there's all sorts of kind of, backstories here, but it is a historic moment, Anna, definitely.
Yeah, we're only a couple of minutes away if he's on time. It is rarely thus, is it not? So what do we need to look out for? Because we don't know if this is going to be country by country, sector by sector, banded or blanket. So what's your best guess at this stage?
Well, I think the difficult thing is going to be kind of, obviously we're going to hear from the president, and trying to get a sense from him as to what the detail is going to be a big question. So we're going to have to keep an eye on, is he going to go specifically through different industries? Is he going to go specifically through different countries? Is he going to provide the data? Are we going to have to wait until a little bit later, which we might well have to do, Anna? It might take a while before the actual briefings that we need. But there is going to be a lot to wade through here. And I think there'll be a lot of bombast, as there always is from the president, and a lot of drama.
Indeed, absolutely that. Wait for the drama, certainly. Let's bring in Beth Rigby, though, because ahead of the announcement, the Prime Minister warned against the idea of a growing trade war. So let's cross to Westminster and our political editor, Beth Rigby. Beth, there is no risk-free approach for any government how they tackle it. If we describe Sir Keir Starmer's approach as passive, that only works if he gets something back in the future, if this is the opening of a negotiation.
Look, Anna, I can tell you that tonight in Whitehall, there are officials and government figures nervously crowded around televisions waiting for this Rose Garden moment, because quite simply, they don't know what Donald Trump is going to do. As Mark and Ed have been talking about, people don't really know what Trump has decided. As I understand it from sources in government, the discussions were still going on this morning. But what they do know is that it will have a negative effect on the UK economy with ramifications that they would rather not have. And the prize, Anna, as you said, is trying to get some carve-outs or this economic deal with the US that officials are still working at pace to get. But the truth is that Keir Starmer went to the White House. He was hopeful that he could maybe swerve tariffs. Donald Trump made pleasant soundings about that. But as they have got further to the wire, President Trump's intent on making these blanket tariffs. Now, what we don't know is whether they will be banded, whether they will go across sectors. One government figure telling me tonight that if they are banded, it's going to be ferociously complicated and could take days to try and work out what it means. There is some hope that what the government does believe is that they have landed the argument, at least with the White House, that the UK is not in the bad books here, that we have a surplus trade deficit, well, not trade, we have a surplus trade relationship with the US, and we aren't the guys, if you like, that should be in the eye of Donald Trump when it comes to meting out tariffs. So they think they have landed that argument. What flows from that is whether they can get some carve-outs and look what would be beneficial for the UK, if you can find a silver lining in this, is if the UK did get some favourable treatment because it is a special relationship partner, because Keir Starmer has done the work with Donald Trump, then that could be quite beneficial to the UK if manufacturers, etc., choose to try and export from the UK because they get better terms with the US. There's so many ifs in my answers because it is all unknown. What is clear is, as Ed was saying, this is a historical moment. It's a massive moment. You've seen how the markets have reacted. There's a reason that they are announcing this after the markets have closed. And this is not just a spring storm that will pass. This is something that could go on and have a massive global impact.
Yes, Beth, I see that US stocks have raised nearly $5 trillion of value since February. It has certainly been a tumultuous time for them. Let's head back to Mark Stone then at the White House. We see the guests arriving. Talk us through who's supposed to be there today, Mark.
All of his cabinet will be there, and there will be some industry leaders, some blue-collar workers as well. I imagine that there will be people invited who are everyday Americans as well. Those people whose industries have been impacted and who have been decimated, Trump would say, over many decades, who he believes he can rebuild those industries, and of course the people at the very heart of Trump's orbit. Susie Wiles, his chief of staff, we just saw her walking in, and his key Treasury officials as well, his key money men, Scott Bessent, the so-called measured voice, I think you could say, within the Trump administration, a former hedge fund manager. He is a man who has argued in the past for targeted, not blanket tariffs. But then against him, there are others within his orbit who are much more of the view that tariffs should be much more extreme. Peter Navarro, Trump's senior counselor for trade and manufacturing, he is a long-time aide and confidant of Donald Trump, a man who establishment economists would say his views are way away from establishment views, a true loyalist and a firm believer in the merits of tariffs. And then Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, a man who British officials have been trying to get close to alongside Scott Bessent to try and make their case to the US administration for not having tariffs imposed. Steve Witkoff, incidentally, you can see there, Trump's deal maker in chief, not front and center of this particular policy announcement that Donald Trump is due to make, but a key figure when it comes to Ukraine, when it comes to the Middle East as well. I was talking about Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, the biggest proponent, I would say, of full throttle tariffs. And he is the man who I think has been really at Donald Trump's side in crafting and molding this day, this Liberation Day. A businessman, philanthropist, a Trump fundraiser throughout the campaign, a billionaire in his own right. His net worth ranges, depending on who you believe, somewhere between $1 billion and $2 billion. A very wealthy man, very close to Donald Trump. I wonder, and there's been some talking around about this, I wonder if things go wrong, if this is not a workable plan, if this is a bit of a disaster, then is he going to be the fall guy? Is Howard Lutnick the one who will take the hit on this? We'll see. And then, of course, J.D. Vance, there he is, the vice president, a more powerful vice president than we have seen for many, many decades in America. The vice president often seen as the spare, someone who doesn't necessarily have a central role in the administration. Goodness me, not so for J.D. Vance, a central figure in so many aspects of this administration, arriving here in the Rose Garden as we await the man himself, Donald Trump, who I imagine will be out any moment now from those windows there. That is the Oval Office behind those flags. From there, Donald Trump will emerge to announce the plans for America for tariffs globally.
And Ed, what about the markets then? I see US stocks have swung higher just ahead of this announcement. The S&P 500 rising 0.7% today. The Dow Jones Industrial Average climbing 0.6%. Nasdaq Composite gaining 0.9%. It's almost as if they haven't fully factored in full throttle tariffs, as Mark Stone just described them.
Well, they've been bouncing around all over the place recently. In fact, actually, I think this is the third day in a row that they've been up. So, but they have been down quite considerably. Before
he's in our shot, isn't he? Should we get him to move?
Yeah, Steve Witkoff dominating our shot. Everyone is trying to work out what's happening here. This has been a very, very closely held secret, the details of precisely how these tariffs are being structured. Very closely held. To a degree that surprised a lot of people. You know, people assumed that the Trump White House was going to be very leaky. In this case, it hasn't been. But it's worth just saying, where does this story really begin? It begins with deindustrialization in America. It begins with that concern that Donald Trump has that there are many people in the Rust Belt who have suffered, and he wants to do something about it.
Yeah, I think it's time for the great reveal. Shall we watch him?
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Nice crowd. What a good-looking group of people. Well, we have some very, very good news today, and a lot of good things are happening for our country. Please sit down. My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day. Waiting for a long time. April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again. Going to make it wealthy, good and wealthy. For decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by nations near and far, both friend and foe alike. American steel workers, auto workers, farmers, and skilled craftsmen, we have a lot of them here with us today. They really suffered gravely. They watched in anguish as foreign leaders have stolen our jobs, foreign cheaters have ransacked our factories, and foreign scavengers have torn apart our once beautiful American dream. We had an American dream that you don't hear so much about. You did 4 years ago, and you are now, but you don't too often, and for many years and decades even, you didn't hear too much about. Our country and its taxpayers have been ripped off for more than 50 years, but it is not going to happen anymore. It's not going to happen. In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. Reciprocal, that means they do it to us and we do it to them. Very simple, can't get any simpler than that. This is one of the most important days, in my opinion, in American history. It's our declaration of economic independence. For years, hardworking American citizens were forced to sit on the sidelines as other nations got rich and powerful, much of it at our expense. But now it's our turn to prosper, and in so doing, use trillions and trillions of dollars to reduce our taxes and pay down our national debt, and it'll all happen very quickly. With today's action, we are finally going to be able to make America great again, greater than ever before. Jobs and factories will come roaring back into our country, and you see it happening already. We will supercharge our domestic industrial base. We will pry open foreign markets and break down foreign trade barriers. And ultimately, more production at home will mean stronger competition and lower prices for consumers. This will be indeed the golden age of America. It's coming back, and we're going to come back very strongly. We're pleased to be joined on this momentous occasion by Vice President J.D. Vance. J.D., thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Where are you, J.D.? No, that wasn't too hard to find. I was looking, you know, he likes to take a low-key attitude, so it'd usually be sit right in front. He's gaining a lot of confidence, Mike, isn't he? And nearly my entire cabinet is here, as well as Speaker Mike Johnson, who's done an amazing job. And with the great success we had last night in Florida, we have a majority of 7. And 7's like a lot when we had it at 1, right? You've done a fantastic job. And many of the members of the House and Senate are with us. Senators, Congressmen, thank you all for being with us. We appreciate it. For decades, the United States slashed our trade barriers on other countries, while those nations placed massive tariffs on our products and created outrageous non-monetary barriers to decimate our industries. And in many cases, the non-monetary barriers were worse than the monetary ones. They manipulated their currencies, subsidized their exports, stole our intellectual property, imposed exorbitant VAT taxes to disadvantage our products, adopted unfair rules and technical standards, and created filthy pollution havens. They were absolutely filthy, but they always came to us and they said, we're violating, we should pay for it. It's all detailed in a very big report by the U.S. Trade Representative on foreign trade barriers, and I'll just hold it up for you. It's available, and you don't have to pay too much. As I understand it, you'll pay nothing. It's a lot of work for something, actually, because it's a special book. It's very, frankly, it's very upsetting when you read it, when you see what people have been doing to us for 30 years. This all happened with no response from the United States of America, none whatsoever. But those days are over. Let me offer just a few examples of the vicious attacks our workers have faced for so many years. The United States charges other countries only a 2.4 tariff on motorcycles. Meanwhile, Thailand and others are charging much higher prices, like 60%. India charges 70%. Vietnam charges 75%, and others are even higher than that. Likewise, until today, the United States has for decades charged a 2.5 tariff. Think of that, 2.5% on foreign-made automobiles. The European Union charges us more than 10% tariffs, and they have 20% VATs, much, much higher. India charges 70%, and perhaps worst of all are the non-monetary restrictions imposed by South Korea, Japan, and very many other nations. As a result of these colossal trade barriers, 81% of the cars in South Korea are made in South Korea. 94% of the cars in Japan are made in Japan. Toyota sells 1 million foreign-made automobiles into the United States, and General Motors sells almost none. Ford sells very little. None of our companies are allowed to go into other countries. And I say that, friend and foe. And in many cases, the friend is worse than the foe in terms of trade. But such horrendous imbalances have devastated our industrial base and put our national security at risk. I don't blame these other countries at all for this calamity. I blame former presidents and past leaders who weren't doing their job. They let it happen, and they let it happen to an extent that nobody can even believe. That's why, effective at midnight, we will impose a 25% tariff on all foreign-made automobiles. Thank you. Brian, I'd like to have you come up here for a second, okay? I just see him sitting. He's been a fan of ours, and he understands this business a lot better than the economists, a lot better than anybody. Brian, say a few words, please, would you?
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
President.
It's a great honor to have you. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. President. I grew up just north of Detroit, Michigan, in Macomb County, known as the home of the Reagan Democrats. My first vote for president was for Ronald Reagan. I thought that was going to be the best president I ever saw in my lifetime until Donald J. Trump came along. I have watched my entire life, I have watched plant after plant after plant in Detroit and in the Metro Detroit area close. There are now plants sitting idle. There are now plants that are underutilized, and Donald Trump's policies are going to bring product back into those underutilized plants. There's going to be new investment. There's going to be new plants built. And the UAW members, and I brought 20 of them with me, they're sitting right over here. We support Donald Trump's policies on tariffs 100%. So, Mr. President, we can't thank you enough. And in 6 months or a year, we're going to begin to see the benefits. I can't wait to see what's happening 3 or 4 years down the road. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you so much. Thank you. What a great guy. He got it right from the beginning. He got it before almost anybody else. This group over there, they got it too. And you know, we won the state of Michigan. We won almost all of them, but we won Michigan by a lot, and I want to just thank you all. The auto workers were fantastic. The Teamsters were fantastic. Everyone was pretty good, I will tell you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. You're going to be very happy very soon, and you probably see what's happening with all of the, not only car companies, but car companies in particular. See it with all of the ones they're moving, they're announcing day in, day out. You're seeing it. Nobody's ever seen anything like that. With today's actions, we're also standing up for our great farmers and ranchers who are brutalized by nations all over the world. Brutalized. Canada, by the way, imposes a 250 to 300% tariff on many of our dairy products. They do the first can of milk. They do the first little carton of milk at a very low price, but after that it gets bad, and then it gets up to 275, 300%. So when they're figuring what's Canada charging, they say, oh, about 2%, 3%. But take a look at what happens down the road. When you look a little bit, it's not a pretty picture, and we don't like it, and it's not fair. It's not fair to our farmers. It's not fair to our country. And with countries like Canada, you know, we subsidize a lot of countries and keep them going and keep them in business. In the case of Mexico, it's $300 billion a year. In the case of Canada, it's close to $200 billion a year. And I say, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? I mean, at what point do we say, you got to work for yourselves, and you got to, this is why we have the big deficits. This is why we have that amount of debt that's been placed on our heads over the last number of years, and we're really not taking it anymore. Through non-tariff barriers, the European Union bans imports of most American poultry. You understand? They say, we want to send you our cars, we want to send you everything, but we're not going to take anything that you have. Australia bans, and they're wonderful people and wonderful everything, but they ban American beef, yet we imported $3 billion of Australian beef from them just last year alone. They won't take any of our beef. They don't want it because they don't want it to affect their farmers. And you know what? I don't blame them, but we're doing the same thing right now, starting about midnight tonight, I would say. And China charges American rice farmers an overquota, it's called, a tariff rate of 65%. South Korea charges 50%. Actually, they charge different, from 50% to 513%. And Japan, our friend, charges us 700%. But that's because they don't want us selling rice, another thing. Who can blame them, Madam Secretary? Agriculture, great job you did on eggs, by the way. The egg prices came down 50%. You got them down 50%. Once we got involved, they were going through the sky. The egg prices, they were going through the sky, and you did a fantastic job. Now we have lots of eggs, and they're much cheaper, down about 59% now, and they're going down further. We charge 2.8% for so many things that other countries are charging 200%, 300%, and 400% for. If imposing tariffs and protective barriers made nations poor, then every country on earth would be racing to eliminate these policies, and China would be the first on line. They run a very strong country, but they're not first in line, and the American people are paying a very big price. From 1789 to 1913, we were a tariff-backed nation, and the United States was proportionately the wealthiest it has ever been. So wealthy, in fact, that in the 1880s, they established a commission to decide what they were going to do with the vast sums of money they were collecting. We were collecting so much money so fast, we didn't know what to do with it. Isn't that a nice problem to have? What do you think, Marco? Good problem? Marco would love that problem. But we don't have that problem anymore, but we're not going to have it very much longer, I will tell you. But they collected so much money, they actually formed a commission to determine what they were going to do with the money, who they were going to give it to, and how much. Then in 1913, for reasons unknown to mankind, they established the income tax so that citizens, rather than foreign countries, would start paying the money necessary to run our government. Then in 1929, it all came to a very abrupt end with the Great Depression, and it would have never happened if they had stayed with the tariff policy. It would have been a much different story. They tried to bring back tariffs to save our country, but it was gone. It was gone. It was too late. Nothing could have been done. It took years and years to get out of that depression, far longer than even FDR had that office right over there for a long period of time. The ramp system, that's rather intricate, was built because of him, and every time you walk up, you think of him, and he did a great job in many ways, but it lasted long beyond his terms, as you know. But it's not too late any longer, and we're going to start being smart, and we're going to start being very wealthy again. We're going to be wealthy as a country because they've taken so much of our wealth away from us. We're not going to let that happen. We truly can be very wealthy. We can be so much wealthier than any country. It's not even believable, but we're getting smart. Nearly a century later, in the face of unrelenting economic warfare, the United States can no longer continue with a policy of unilateral economic surrender. We cannot pay the deficits of Canada, Mexico, and so many other countries. We used to do it. We can't do it anymore. We take care of countries all over the world. We pay for their military. We pay for everything they have to pay, and then when you want to cut back a little bit, they get upset that you're not taking care of them any longer. But we have to take care of our people, and we're going to take care of our people first, and I'm sorry to say that. And today we're standing up for the American worker, and we are finally putting America first. In Sleepy Joe Biden's last year in office, the United States hemorrhaged 100,000 manufacturing jobs, and the number was going through the roof at levels never seen before. And our trade deficit reached a record $1.2 trillion, which is unheard of. Since the beginning of NAFTA, the worst trade deal ever made, it was a horror show. I was able to terminate. They all said you'd never be able to get it out. We had to get approval from Congress to get it terminated. We had to live with that deal. It was the worst deal, worst trade deal ever made by far. But since the very beginning of NAFTA, our country lost 90,000 factories. Think of what that is, 90,000. Think about putting a map up and putting tax on it. You wouldn't have enough room. 90,000. I said, is that possible? We had it checked 4 different times, and it was actually somewhat higher than that. And 5 million manufacturing jobs were lost while racking up trade deficits of $19 trillion. That was the worst trade deal ever made. As a result of these gigantic losses, foreign nations now own $26 trillion more of American assets than think of this, than the Americans own of their own foreign assets or other foreign assets. The United States can no longer produce enough antibiotics to treat our sick. We have a tremendous problem. We have to go to foreign countries to treat our sick. If anything ever happened from a war standpoint, we wouldn't be able to do it. We import virtually all of our computers, phones, televisions, and electronics. We used to dominate the field, and now we import it all from different countries. A single shipyard in China now produces more ships every year than all of the American shipyards combined. Think of that. And it was a business that we used to dominate. We used to dominate it totally. In short, chronic trade deficits are no longer merely an economic problem. They're a national emergency that threatens our security and our very way of life. It's a very great threat to our country. And for these reasons, starting tomorrow, the United States will implement reciprocal tariffs on other nations. It's been a long time since we even thought of that. We used to think about it a lot. We didn't think about it for many decades, and you see what's happened. For nations that treat us badly, we will calculate the combined rate of all their tariffs, non-monetary barriers, and other forms of cheating. And because we are being very kind, we're kind people, very kind. You're not so kind when you got ripped off with your salaries. My auto worker friends and my Teamster friends and all of the unions that typically voted Democrat, they're not voting Democrat anymore because worker, whether union or non-worker, they're for the Republicans now. That's what happened. But we will charge them approximately half of what they are and have been charging us. So the tariffs will be not a full reciprocal. I could have done that, yes, but it would have been tough for a lot of countries. We didn't want to do that. I'd like to see the chart if you have it. Could you bring it up, Howard? This is our great Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick. Thanks, Howard. So if you look at that, China, first row, China, 67%. That's tariffs charged to the USA, including currency manipulation and trade barriers. So 67%, I think you can, for the most part, see it. Those with good eyes, with bad eyes. We didn't want to bring, it's very windy out here. We didn't want to bring out the big charts because it had no chance of standing. Fortunately, we came armed with a little smaller chart. So it's 67%, so we're going to be charging a discounted reciprocal tariff of 34%. I think, in other words, they charge us, we charge them less. So how can anybody be upset? They will be because we never charge anybody anything, but now we're going to charge. European Union, they're very tough, very, very tough traders. You know, you think of European Union, very friendly. They rip us off. It's so sad to see. It's so pathetic. 39%, we're going to charge them 20%, so we're charging them essentially half. Vietnam, great negotiators, great people. They like me, I like them. The problem is they charge us 90%. We're going to charge them 46% tariff. Taiwan, where they took all of our computer chips and semiconductors. We used to be the king, right? We were everything. We had all of it. Now we have almost none of it, except the biggest company is coming in. We're going to end up with almost 40%. Lee Zeldin's working to get their approvals. And it's an amazing company. Mr. Wei, of one of the great companies of the world, actually. They're coming in from Taiwan, and they're going to build one of the biggest plants in the world, maybe the biggest for that. But 64%, we're going to charge them 32%. Japan, very, very tough, great people. And again, I don't blame the people for doing it. I think they're very smart in doing it. I blame the people that sat right in that Oval Office, right over there, right behind the Resolute desk or whichever desk they chose. Japan, 46%. They would charge us 46%, and much higher for certain items like cars, you know, little items like cars. 46%, we're charging them 24%. India, very, very tough, very, very tough. The Prime Minister just left, and he's a great friend of mine, but I said, you're a friend of mine, but you're not treating us right. They charge us 52%. You have to understand, we charge them almost nothing for years and years and decades, and it was only 7 years ago when I came in, we started with China and charged them. We took in hundreds of billions of dollars from China in tariffs, and they understood, honestly. President Xi understood. He said, look, I understand, and the other countries, and they all understand. We're going to have to go through a little tough love, maybe, but they all understand. They're ripping us off, and they understood it. Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe. He was a fantastic man. He was unfortunately taken from us, assassination. But I went to him and I said, Shinzo, we have to do something. Trade is not fair. And he said, I know that, I know that. And he was a great gentleman. He was a fantastic man, but he understood immediately what I was talking about. I said, Shinzo, we have to do something. He said, I know that. And we worked out a deal, and it would have been a much better deal, but frankly, there were many years left on the deal that was made previous to my getting there, but it was something. If you look at Switzerland, 61% to 31%, Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia, oh, look at Cambodia, 97%. We're going to bring it down to 49. They made a fortune with the United States of America. United Kingdom, 10%, and we'll go 10%. So we'll do the same thing. South Africa, 60%, 30%, and they've got some bad things going on in South Africa. You know, we're paying them billions of dollars, and we cut the funding because a lot of bad things are happening in South Africa. The fake news ought to be looking at it. They don't want to report it. Brazil, 10%, 10%. Bangladesh is 74%. So you see what's going on. Pakistan, 58%. Sri Lanka, 88%. So what we're doing is we're taking not the full, we could take the full 88%. Thanks a lot, Howard. He's doing a very good job. How's he doing, all right? I think you better take it with you. It's not going to last very long. He's going to put it, it's going to follow you down with the wind. I brought a hat just in case it got too windy, but here, would anybody like a hat? I'm not giving it to a cabinet. I'm giving it to the auto workers. Come here. Thank you, fellas. Get it. That's it. That's it. They deserve it more than our cabinet. Our cabinet has plenty of hats. But you see the numbers. The numbers are so disproportionate. They're so unfair. At the same time, we will establish a minimum baseline tariff of 10%. You notice that on the chart. And that'll be on other countries to help rebuild our economy and to prevent cheating. So we're going to have a minimum of cheating, and we're going to be very severe on the people that at the gate that watch the tariffs and watch the product coming in, because there's been a lot of bad things happening at the gate because the money is so enormous that you're talking about. There's never been probably anything like it in terms of the enormity, and there are a lot of bad things happen at the people that do the check-in, and they're looking at 10-year jail sentences if they do play. We're going to treat them so good, but if they cheat, the repercussions are going to be extremely strong. Foreign nations will finally be asked to pay for the privilege of access to our market, the biggest market in the world. We're right now the biggest market in the world. We had a great country 4 years ago in terms of the economics. We were doubling up on China. We were doing so well. Nobody was going to catch us, but so much of it slipped away over the last 4 years under Biden. I campaigned on this policy throughout last year, and today that promise was made, and it was also a promise, as you know, that was kept. Promises made, promises kept. To any company that objects to our common sense reciprocal tariffs, again, reciprocal, back and forth, and forth. And I call this kind reciprocal. This is not full reciprocal. This is kind reciprocal. But what we do is we cut it in half. We charge them. My answer is very simple. If they complain, if you want your tariff rate to be zero, then you build your product right here in America, because there is no tariff if you build your plant, your product in America. And we've seen companies coming in like we've never seen before. Likewise to all of the foreign presidents, prime ministers, kings, queens, ambassadors, and everyone else who will soon be calling to ask for exemptions from these tariffs. I say, terminate your own tariffs, drop your barriers, don't manipulate your currencies. They manipulate their currencies like nobody can even believe, which is a bad, bad thing and very devastating to us. And start buying tens of billions of dollars of American goods. Tariffs give our country protection against those that would do us economic harm. And many people were looking to do us economic harm. Maybe not so obviously, but they were doing tremendous economic harm. But even more importantly, they will give us growth. These tariffs are going to give us growth like you haven't seen before. And it'll be something very special to watch. I am so looking forward. And Brian, it's going to happen even faster than you said. You know, you might say, but it's already started. It's already started. Work's already begun on plants all around the country. And you see that as before. These are big, rich companies. We have $61 billion started on a big plant going up. It's going to be announced over the next 2 days, and they already started work. Many of these the biggest companies in the world, they've committed to build, build, build. We're going to build, 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 sir. And they came here to see me, and they wanted to know if they could have a press conference. I do as many as I can. I'm pretty busy trying to stop Russia and Ukraine and the Middle East. We got to stop that. We got to stop the Houthis, which we're making tremendous. They like shooting ships down and out of the water, sinking ships. They get a kick out of it, but they're not getting such a kick out of it now, are they, Mr. Secretary? They're not getting such a kick out of that now. But here are just a short list of some of the companies that have already announced and committed to investment. And this is a company that built its factories and its plants in China. Apple is going to spend $500 billion. They never spent money like that here. They're going to build their plants here. SoftBank, OpenAI, and Oracle, great companies, are investing $500 billion almost immediately. NVIDIA, a hot company, is investing hundreds of billions of dollars. They just announced. TSMC, the biggest, most important company in the world of chips from Taiwan, with no investment from us, is investing $200 billion. And they said the reason was, number one, the election of November 5th, and number two, the tariffs. They don't want to pay the tariffs, and the way they're not paying it is to build their plant here. So we're going to go from almost no percentage. We used to have 100% of the chip market. Now it's all in Taiwan. Almost all of it's in Taiwan, a couple of other countries, but mostly in Taiwan. And think of it, we had 100%. We lost it because of people in that office that didn't do their job. They allowed it to be stolen from us. Johnson & Johnson, great company, $55 billion. Eli Lilly, $27 billion. Meta is investing $500 billion. Wow. DeMac is investing $20 billion. CMA, CGM, $20 billion. And then you have Merck and Clarios, Stellantis, General Motors, GE Aerospace, Honda, Nissan, Hyundai are all putting in billions and billions of dollars, and they're committed 100%. So. And we've never had, and this is after 2.5 months. This is after just a short, this all took place as soon as we came out with what everybody wanted to do. You know, I watched a gentleman today on television. He used to work with Lee Iacocca, a very respected automobile person, and he said, you know, because they're asking people, and they try and get as many negative people as they can, but they can't find them too much. It's pretty hard to find in terms of what we're doing, especially when they see all this investment. They said, so tell me, what do you think of what Trump is doing from the automobile standpoint? He said, I can't believe it. Somebody is finally, he's an older guy, real pro, really top guy, with Lee Iacocca. He said, I never thought I'd see the day when this would happen, where somebody had the courage to go and do what has to be done. This is transforming our nation. Our entire nation is going to be transformed, not only with the cars, but on every single other item that's built. We're going to become an industrial powerhouse. And he said that so beautifully today. In fact, I'm going to find out, I'm going to get a tape. And Bruce, I'm going to get that tape and I'm going to send it to you out in Long Island, and you're going to play it for the people. And all your union workers and your non-union workers out there, you got a pretty even split. But we have, so far, it looks like we're going to have about $6 trillion of investments, and you wouldn't do that in years in this country over the last number of years. $6 trillion, and that's going to be much higher by the end of the year. And think of what $6 trillion is. You wouldn't have even a small percentage of that under this other system. We're going to be an entirely different country, and it's going to be fantastic for the workers. It's going to be fantastic for everyone. There will never have been a transformation of a country like the transformation that's already happening in the United States of America. It's an incredible thing to watch, and it's incredible to meet with the top people, people that you read about, very wealthy people, or people that are great managers and executives and presidents of big public companies, and to watch the enthusiasm they have now that they didn't have. They gave up on our country. They went to foreign countries and they built. Companies are pouring into our country at levels never seen before, with jobs and money to follow, and it's really beautiful. In the coming days, there will be complaints from the globalists and the outsourcers and special interests and the fake news. Always, fake news will always complain. But never forget, every prediction our opponents made about trade for the last 30 years has been proven totally wrong. They were wrong about NAFTA. They were wrong about China. They were wrong about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which would have been a disaster if I didn't terminate it. If I didn't terminate that, United Auto Workers, you would have had no jobs in this country. You would have had no jobs. It was all going to other countries. In my first term, they said tariffs would crash the economy. Instead, we built the greatest economy in the history of the world. And again, I have great respect for President Xi of China, great respect for China, but they were taking tremendous advantage of us, and I commend them for that. I say, hey, if you can get away with it, that's okay. But, you know, they understand exactly what's happening, and they probably, most of them are saying it's about time they did something, but, and they're going to fight, and they're going to fight fair. Everyone's going to fight. You know, it's like, I say to the leaders, look, you got to take care of your country, but we have to start taking care of our country now. We can't do what we've been doing for the last 50 years. From the day of my election, the stock market went up in my first term 88%, with NASDAQ going up 155%, more than any president has ever had in any term in office, by far. And I think we're going to blow that away. And maybe the numbers won't show, but I think they're going to show much better than even those numbers. But what you're going to see is you're going to see activity, that empty, dead sites, factories that are falling down. Those factories will be knocked down, and they're going to have brand new factories built in their place. They're not only talking about renovating, they're talking about brand new, the best anywhere in the world, the biggest anywhere in the world. I have a friend who builds car plants, and I said, I want to see the biggest and the best. He said, well, we have to go to Mexico. I said, no, I want to see it in the United States. He said, we're not building them in there. This is a year and a half ago during the campaign. He said, we're not building it. You'd have to go to Mexico. When I was starting to decide to run, and I went to #1 in the polls very rapidly, I want to say, like, let's say in the first hour. And then shortly thereafter, it looked like I was going to win, and the fake news was saying, oh, no, don't do this. What they don't know is if I didn't win, they would have really been in trouble, because nobody wants to read them anyway. But I tell you what, when it looked like I was going to win, I announced that I was going to be doing exactly what we're talking about today. Great consistency, actually, because I've been talking about it for 40 years. But because I saw what was happening 40 years ago. If you look at my old speeches when I was young, very handsome. My old speeches, and that people would say, I'd be on a television show, I'd be talking about how we were being ripped off by these countries. I mean, nothing changes very much. The only thing that changed were the countries, but nothing really changes. But, you know, it's why it's such an honor It's such an honor to be finally able to do this. If you look at China, I took in hundreds of billions of dollars in my term, hundreds of billions. They never paid 10 cents to any other president, and yet they paid hundreds of billions, so much so that Biden couldn't do anything. They wanted to try and terminate it because he had a very special relationship with China. You know what the relationship was? He had a special relationship. But the numbers were so big, that they couldn't do it. So they did ease it up. They did things that they shouldn't have done. They made it a lot more comfortable for them, but they couldn't do it because the numbers were hundreds of billions of dollars, and I did that. And we were on our way to doing something like incredible. And then we had a very bad election happen, a very bad election. A lot of bad things happened. So when I said we got to do it again, I said we have to make it too big to rig. And we made it too big to rig, and we won in records, and it was a monumental win. And it was such an honor to see so many of you, like Brian and your friends, here with us to celebrate and to, more importantly, celebrate what we're doing, because that wouldn't be a full celebration if we didn't do this, because this will be an entirely different country in a short period of time. It'll be something the whole world will be talking about it. The critics made the very tired predictions earlier this year, but in February, core inflation dropped to the lowest rate in 4 years. And the price of eggs, as you know, just in a month and a half, we were there for 4 weeks. And the first week, I got blamed for eggs. I said, I just got here. They said eggs have gone up at like 250%, and you can't get eggs. And they were going crazy. And I said, I just got here. And then we got to work on eggs, and we got to work on everything. And our great Secretary of Agriculture, you did a fantastic job. Brooke Rollins, she did a fantastic job. And as I said before, the price of eggs dropped now 59%, and they're going down more, and the availability is fantastic. They were saying that for Easter, please don't use eggs. Could you use plastic eggs? I said, we don't want to do that. We want to, and you really came through. It's an amazing job. Thank you very much, Brooke. You did great. But likewise, an old-fashioned term that we use, groceries. I used it in the campaign. It's such an old-fashioned term, but a beautiful term, groceries. It sort of says a bag with different things in it. Groceries went through the roof, and I campaigned on that. I talked about the word groceries for a lot, and energy costs now are down, groceries are down, gasoline is way under $3, and people are beginning to be able to buy things and live again. We brought prices way down. We created 10,000 already in a few weeks, new manufacturing jobs. And it was that took place in 1 month, numbers that they haven't seen in a long time. We had virtually no inflation under my term. We had virtually no inflation for 4 years, but after transitioning over to Sleepy Joe, it went from almost non-existent to the highest in the history of our country. They had the highest inflation in the history of our country, brought up by energy and bad spending and bad policy, and a lot of bad things happened. How about allowing millions and millions and millions of people to pour into our country with open borders, where it's so sad to see even now. And I see our great secretary you have done. Stand up, please, Christy. Stand up. Christy Noem and Tom Homan. These people are doing a great job, but gotten them out in records. We have problems with judges that don't want them to go out. They want Tren de Aragua, and they want MS-13, the most vicious gangs ever. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. Absolute killer gangs. They kill people. They don't even think about it. And we put them out, and we have judges now, radical left judges that they don't want them to go out. They want them to even be brought back. Let's bring them back. You've done a fantastic job, and please thank everybody. Homeland Security, thank everybody. Appreciate it. And we now have a border that's the best border that we've ever had, even better than it was my first term. My first term we did good, but this one we really specialized in. We've done really well. And we had records then. We had the best, safest border. 4 years ago, we had the best border there ever was. And now we have, you've actually matched it and done even better. And we're going to get it down the right way. And we want people, by the way, to come into our country, but we want the to come in through a legal process. We want them to come in legally. We need more people. We need people to run these plants and to help the auto workers and the Teamsters and the non-union people and everybody else. But we need people, and the farmers. And we're going to let people come in, but they want to come in. We want them to come in legally. They have to have the capability of loving our country, not people that hate our country. We don't want them in our country. And now we're going to pass the largest tax cuts in American history, and that's where we're relying on Mike and John Thune. And we will not cut Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid benefits, and the Democrats will, because if they got in, the entire economy would collapse. This country was heading for a collapse under the people that you saw. They were horrible. I think one of the reasons people like the job, I have my highest approval ratings because I think they're comparing me to the worst administration in the history of our country, so I appreciate that at least. But Speaker of the House Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader, appreciate it, Mike. John Thune have been fantastic, by the way. But they've been working tirelessly on taking the next step to pass the plan for our one big, beautiful bill. I'd like to name it that if you can. One big, beautiful. I made that statement about 6 months ago, and everybody calls it one big, beautiful bill. And it will be that. It'll have everything, the big tax cuts and every incentive there is. And it'll be fantastic. And by the way, for the cars, we're asking for an interest deduction on a loan. So if you build the car, only in America we do it, Brian. If the car's not built in America, you don't get the interest rate deduction. But if you build the car in America, if you buy a car, if it's built in America, then you get an interest rate deduction, tax deduction, and that's a big thing. That's going to be a big thing. I think that's going to pay for itself very quickly, that deduction. Never happened. We've never had anything like that before. Somebody said, where do you get the idea? Because it's so basic. You would think that would have happened a long time ago. It never did, and I'm very happy it didn't, because now I can say that was my idea. But we're going to get us closer to the debt extension. We have to get the debt extension passed, and I know you're going to be able to do that, Mike, and it's very important that you do that. And all of the other things that the Senate budget plan gives us, along with working, because I know they're working together, John and Mike, and the two bills are going very well together. We need to get our shared priorities done, including certain permanent tax cuts. We want the tax cuts to be permanent, spending cuts, energy and historic investments in defense, border, and so much more. We're covering everything. These will be phenomenal. There'll be no bill like this going to straighten. One bill is going to straighten out our country for many, many years to come. And we said, let's just do it and let's get it done. And some guys will love it and some guys will like it a little bit less because they're not getting what they were exactly looking for, but they're getting a lot. They'll never, if we get this done, it'll be the most incredible bill ever passed in the history of our Congress and Senate and congressmen, the senators and the congressmen, many of whom are here today, will be very proud of themselves. I really believe that it's going to set us on a whole new prosperous path. We're going to cut spending and right-size the budget back to where it should be. We're going to do that very strongly. Thank you, Rick. Thank you. John, thank you. Oh, look at all of our senators over there. Oh, boy. That's a nice group of people. But I won't like them so much if they don't get this bill done. That's a great group. And Congressman, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Tremendous people. The Senate plan has my complete and total support, and the House plan likewise is very similar. They're moving along pretty much at the same clip, and as soon as you're ready, you'll show it to me, and I'm sure it'll have my support, Mike. Every Republican congressman and senator must unify. We have to unify. We can't be separated. We have to get it done. We have to get absolutely everything we can, and we have to take care of the American people. That's the only thing that matters. We have to take care of the American people first. We need to pass this bill immediately, get it done, including debt extension. From this day on, we're not going to let anyone tell us that American workers and families cannot have the future that they deserve. We're going to produce the cars and ships, chips, airplanes, minerals, and medicines that we need right here in America. The pharmaceutical companies are going to become roaring back. They're coming roaring back. They're all coming back to our country, because if they don't, they got a big tax to pay. And if they do, I'll be very happy and you're going to be very happy and you're going to be very safe. We're going to build our future with American hands, with American heart, American steel, and we're going to build it with American pride like we used to. We're approaching our 100th day as president and have been given credit by a lot of people, actually, even some of the fake news. Can you believe it? Which in this case, hopefully, isn't fake, for having done more in that time than any other administration in the history of our country in the first 100 days. I think we've had an amazing, in terms of what we've done, what we've gotten accomplished. I'd like to see if we can get that war ended and another war from not starting in the Middle East. We have to get Russia. They're losing 2,000 on average, 2,500 people a day, young people, soldiers, Russian. Think of that, 2,500 through some days, but on average, probably over about a 1 week period, it's 2,712, they say. They're losing those soldiers. They're dying. They're being decimated. And they're not from our country, but they're from other countries, but they're human beings. They're from Russia. They're from Ukraine in this period, most of them. And we're going to get it stopped. It's a senseless war that would have never happened if I was president, and it shouldn't be allowed to go on. And I think we're being given good cooperation by Russia and by Ukraine, but we have to get it stopped. It's humanity. It's humanity. It's a terrible thing. This will be a very big moment. I think you're going to remember today. It's going to be a free nation that we're dealing with. We're going to have a very free and beautiful nation. It's going to be Liberation Day in America, and it's going to be a day that hopefully you're going to look back in years to come and you're going to say, you know, he was right. This has turned out to be one of the most important days in the history of our country. God bless you and God bless America. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So day 74 of the second Trump term, and one of the most seismic. The Rose Garden of the White House, the benign setting as we see Donald Trump choosing to blow up the world economic order, a global order that the USA was instrumental in developing for its own prosperity and the wealth of other nations over the last nearly 8 decades. Mr. Trump is back.
One closes what's referred to as the de minimis loophole with respect to imports from the
Not even Hail Mary.
The other is the big one, is the reciprocal tariff executive order that the president just spoke about at length. This is obviously a huge deal, and it's been an honor to be part of your team getting started.
This is big stuff. That's a 10. That's a good one. I'm going to hand out these pens.
Mr. President, what do you say to American families who are worried they'll pay more?
So Donald Trump there signing what he called a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. The baseline has been set at 10%. The UK will pay that, along with nations like Brazil and Singapore. It goes up to the likes of Cambodia, who will be charged 49%, Sri Lanka 44%, Vietnam 46%, Lesotho a 50% reciprocal tariff, and the European Union paying 20% reciprocal tariffs too. He said our nation has been looted, pillaged, raped and plundered by other nations. Taxpayers, he said, have been ripped off for more than 50 years, but it is not going to happen anymore. And holding aloft a cardboard chart with the foreign trade tariffs, he called this the golden age of America, our declaration of economic independence. Tariffs, he said, have decimated America's industrial base. But from now on, world trade will be unpredictable, expensive, more complicated. Now we see who can cope and who will fail, where business will choose to trade and choose to locate. And that question again of who is friend and who is foe, lines blurred again by a Trump policy designed to regenerate manufacturing in America. We're heading towards 10 o'clock, but let's bring in our US correspondent, Mark Stone, who listened through that. Enormous tariffs for some nations. The UK, I guess, Mark, breathing something of a sigh of relief.
Yes, what an historic day. The event, the show, was Trump to a T with the baseball cap in hand, the large posters with the numbers on it, and in the audience, the hard hats of the blue-collar workers who he says will benefit from this massive juggernaut that he is now pushing through the global economy. The headlines are that there will be two levels of tariffs, a baseline universal tariff of 10% on all countries, which will go into effect on the 5th of April at 12:01 a.m. And then on top of that, specific reciprocal tariff rates for countries that are the worst offenders. That will go into effect on the 9th of April at 12:01. So a little bit more time for those worst offenders, the UK not among them, to work out what they do, whether they retaliate or whether they try to carve out some sort of a deal by removing their own tariffs that they have in place on the United States. About 60 countries make up the worst offenders, as Trump sees it. China, 60 tariffs, according to the United States, charged by China on America, 67%. And so they've halved that. That is what Donald Trump has said that they've done. To be kind, he said. So 34% universal tariffs from China on China by the United States, the European Union 20%. But the key for us, of course, for the UK is what the rate is, and it is a rate of 10% on all goods coming from the UK into the United States. The exception is vehicles, cars, which will be tariffed 25%. So right now in Downing Street, they will be crunching those numbers, absorbing details that they didn't know until the president announced them, trying to establish what now, where now, how the British government responds to this extraordinary development from here, the Rose Garden at the White House.
Indeed, Mark, and on one specific example, that of the auto industry, the 25% autos tariff, a Reuters analysis of the tariffs presented tonight suggests they will extend to nearly $600 billion worth of auto parts. That's just one example. Well, Sir Keir Starmer has clearly tackled this quite differently to the European Union. Let's find out how the reaction is from Downing Street now and bring in our political editor, Beth Rigby. What have they said, Beth?
Well, Anna, it's been quite a rollercoaster for the government, where they went from the hope that they could avoid tariffs, that they could get that economic deal, to the realisation that that was not going to happen. And then the anticipation of how hard would the UK be hit. And I think tonight in Westminster there is actual relief, because the UK is going to have a 10% baseline tariff, but that is the least onerous of all the tariffs. You saw President Trump there with his chart of the worst offenders, and the UK was well at the bottom of that list. Number 10, sources telling me, as President Trump was in the Rose Garden, that while no tariffs are good and it's not what they want, the fact that the UK has tariffs that are lower than others vindicates our approach. That's a government source. They said it's important because of the big difference between, say, a 20% tariff to a 10% tariff is potential job cuts for the UK. And then where to next? They say we will keep negotiating, keep cool and calm. And again, a reiteration that the UK government, Keir Starmer, wants to negotiate a sustainable trade deal. Of course, we want to get tariffs lowered. Tomorrow, we will continue with that work. Another Whitehall source telling me that the 10% tariff bears up with what they were hearing, that the UK is at least in the friendlies club, as much as that is worth anything when it comes to Donald Trump. Look, here overnight, people will be now number crunching, trying to work out what it means. There is a 25% tariff on cars that could hit with billions on UK exports, and then this 10% tariff. So they'll be crunching the numbers to work out what the fallout is for the economy. But I can tell you, Anna, that despite this being lower than many other countries, it will take a hit to GDP, with forecasts being downgraded probably as we speak, as those tariffs kick in. They kick in from tomorrow. And I think now the approach to the government will be to not retaliate, to try and speed up that economic deal in the hope that they can lower that tariff even more with the US. But there will be concessions, for example, a movement potentially on the digital services tax. Will the UK lower that tax? It's worth £800 million a year to the Chancellor. Will that be lowered or changed? Will they loosen regulation on social media companies? Will they loosen regulation on agricultural products, for example? So there is no free hit here for the UK either. To get that economic deal, they will have to make further concessions. But I think for now, there is some relief that they were not hit as hard as many others.
Beth, with that update, thank you. Well, our economics editor, Ed Conway, was sat watching Donald Trump with me. And Ed, your response was, it's all just so massive. So what is your assessment?
Well, let me just give you a sense of what we know so far about this. There's still a few unanswered questions, but finally we got the detail on what Donald Trump meant by this Liberation Day. And let me just kind of start by showing you these bars are how high those tariffs, the US tariffs, are on various different countries around the world at the moment, or rather before Donald Trump came into office, and a quick kind of bit of revision on where we've come from so far. So threatened tariffs on Mexico and Canada. They were repeatedly threatened, repeatedly rescinded or lifted, but they might well be back again, who knows. But for the time being, they're gone. We know we got an extra 10% tariffs on China, China 1.0, then another extra 10% tariffs on China 2.0, you might call them. And we're now kind of waiting to find out what will happen next. And we finally did find it out. Let's just start. There are two parts to this, OK? So first of all, there is going to be a 10% baseline tariff. So you see all of these bars go up by 10%, including, of course, the UK. But that, as far as the White House is concerned, is just a baseline. And then on top of that, there are different tariffs for different nations, what they call reciprocal tariffs. And they say they've gone through the numbers. They've looked at not just the tariffs that other countries around the world are charging the US, but also what they call non-tariff barriers, so other things. And they've worked out, by the way, Canada, those Mexico-Canada tariffs might well come back, so we might well start from that position. But reciprocal tariffs might push all of these bars, or will push all of these bars up considerably higher. So just look at how the picture of trade and tariffs in the US has changed dramatically as a result of these measures, which are coming in the next few days. And just to give you a few highlights of what we're talking about, so you could look, for instance, over there at China. So China, that's a 34% reciprocal tariff, but it takes the total amount, provided that goes on top of the existing tariff, it takes the total amount up above 50%. And you're talking, you know, when tariffs are going above 50%, that makes any trade very, very difficult and far less likely to happen. So that's China, but you can probably see here Vietnam as well. And the point here from the White House has been to say, listen, lots of Chinese goods going into the US, but also going through, being Vietnam and Cambodia as well, being conduits for goods to go to America. And the point here from Donald Trump is that the US wants to reindustrialize. And so it's all about trying to make things domestically. But finally, look at the UK, 10% on the UK. And for many people here, obviously, it is a big increase on where things were before, only a few percent, the average rate for the UK. But that goes up to 10%. It is the best rate that anyone has amongst any nations. In fact, the best rate that any G7, any leading economy in the world has, and certainly better than the EU, all of whom are having to pay an extra 20% in total, so 10%, another 10% on top. But even so, all of this will potentially diminish the amount of trade going on around the world and diminish the amount of stuff going into the US. And finally, it's worth just saying, what was the stock market reaction? Well, this decision was made after markets had closed, but we can look at the futures market. This is the NASDAQ futures market, and look at what happened. It went up a little bit after the announcement, and then it's come down quite considerably. So a market reaction there, which implies that when markets open in Asia, and indeed when they were open across the US and Europe, we're going to see some falls to come as people respond to this.
Ed, take a seat. I've got another question for you. There is more coming out of the White House right now, senior White House officials, etc. Trump is to sign an order that closes the de minimis loophole. This is according to an aide. Tell us why that is significant and how it might affect a nation like China, for example.
So this is on top of all of those things we were showing you. De minimis basically means that for really small, kind of low-value items that are going in and out of countries, a lot of that stuff just isn't charged a tariff. So what is the tariff ultimately? It is just, you know, we're going to charge you 20% on everything that comes into the country, although it's the recipient that actually pays it. But for fast fashion, for items that are going in that are relatively cheap, and this is a big thing for China, you know, you've got companies like Shein who are sending stuff relatively cheaply from Guangdong and different parts of China. Right now, that's not subject to any tariffs. Donald Trump said earlier on, so when he had one of his early kind of, we're going to impose tariffs on China, he said, we're getting rid of de minimis. But then what happened was that suddenly, in airports around the US, you were seeing massive big piles of goods that no one was quite sure what to do with, because it's an enormous administrative challenge. And I think that, Anna, is the bigger issue here. Raising all of these tariffs, different tariffs on different countries, and a kind of extraordinary smorgasbord of different numbers we've just seen, and Donald Trump, you know, held up this chart of all of different numbers. It is likely to just increase the amount of work that it takes for America to collect these tariffs. But the point that Donald Trump wants to make, can I show one more chart, like as a bonus thing? But the point that Donald Trump wants to make is that back in a long time ago, the majority of federal revenues came from tariffs. Raising money from tariffs, and right now that line is basically down, you know, close to zero, kind of only a few percent. And his point is always, rather than raising money through income tax, couldn't we raise it again through tariffs? And I'll spare you the next charts, but point out that ultimately that is really, really tough to do. It's really tough in the modern world of 2025, when you have, you know, welfare states, when you have Medicare, when you have, you know, standing armies that are quite expensive. You can't just raise all of your money through tariffs. No one has been able to do that. And so that is the challenge that he's faced with right now. But what he wants to do is to be able to say, we're going to try and reindustrialise, hence all of those tariffs on China, on Vietnam, on Cambodia, and we're going to try and raise a bit of money from it in the process. And I think that's the selling point. But what comes next is the retaliation. You know, we start to hear from, you know, Europe, and we know they're going to retaliate. What comes next is more market reaction. And this is going to roll and roll. Even though we've got detail tonight, we're going to be talking about this for many weeks and months to come.
Indeed so. He's talking about $6 trillion of inward investment, isn't he, already, as nations relocate to America, which is his hope, quite clearly. Let's get more reaction then, shall we, around the world from two places which have been in the tariff spotlight. Sky's Europe correspondent Adam Parsons is in Brussels and Dan Whitehead is in Toronto, Canada. Adam, to you first of all, 20%. What is the likely response from the Europeans?
Well, as Ed has just been saying, there will be a response. There will be some form of retaliation. But I think at the moment, Europe is taking a breath, appraising this and trying to decide just how firmly it should react. And there are a few schools of thought here. Look, number one is the German car industry, 25% tariff. We knew that was coming, but that is going to hit that industry hard. A second thing is a 20% tariff across the board. It is harder to deal with than some of the models that have been talked about here in Europe. I think the worst case they saw was 25% across the board. So there will be those who take a very tough response in this and say that the EU shouldn't just go for this sort of base expected level of tariffs, looking at things like American whiskey and Harley-Davidson motorbikes and certain foodstuffs, things that they have already said are likely to get a tariff, but that they should go further, harder, that they should look at things that are out with the normal tariff situation, that perhaps could be extra regulation burdens on banks, and also focusing, and this would be a sort of nuclear option, is going for the big high-tech industries, going for Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, companies who they see as being near to Trump and as having an overbearing reach into the European market. I think the one thing the EU won't do is react really fast. They've said that they will think about this. They're going to canvass opinions. But one other thought just for you tonight is that this also raises all sorts of unexpected consequences. And one of them is going to be about Northern Ireland, because Ireland now has a 20% tariff with America. Northern Ireland has a 10% tariff with America. That is going to make the Windsor framework even harder to implement.
Yes, certainly something that was raised at Prime Minister's questions today. Adam, a very important point there. Thank you. Well, let's bring in Dan Whitehead in Toronto in Canada. Already, many Canadians feel that this has irrevocably changed their relationship with their nearest neighbour. No new tariffs for them, no more extra 10%, the baseline figure we heard about today. But the auto industry, a massive hit for the Canadians.
Yeah, this is all about cars in Canada. That is the focus. They had feared since this was first announced by President Trump last month, this 25% tariff on completed cars coming over to the border, that would be implemented. Of course, we got that confirmation. How quickly could that result in job losses in places like this? This is a car parts factory on the outskirts of Toronto. Well, I spoke to one of the trade bosses this afternoon. He said that you could see mass redundancies. Bear in mind that there are 500,000 people employed in the car sector in Canada within 1 week. That is how significant it is going to be, because they simply can't run that industry with a 25% increase. There may be some sigh of relief, as you say, that they were not on that billboard, they were not on that list of the worst offenders. But we understand from White House sources that the focus really will be on the fentanyl crisis, on the migration crisis between Mexico and Canada, as President Trump sees it. And Canada has got to sort that out. And if it doesn't, it could go on that billboard list, or it may go down to the 10% baseline list. For the time being, though, perhaps some relief that there isn't that blanket new tariff. But for the automotive industry, this is really severe. This company alone here in Ontario, even before President Trump's announcement, has laid off 4 members of staff. It had a big US car maker cancel an order just last week. So the impact right down to a place like this, which makes the nuts and bolts, quite literally, that go into 4 GM cars down in the United States, they are already feeling the impact. And that goes all the way up to the exporters. So they'll be analysing that over the coming hours and the coming days, over how Canada can simply operate a huge industry that's worth tens of billions of dollars with a 25% tariff.
Dan Whitehead, live for us there amidst the car parts. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let us return to our US correspondent, Mark Stone, at the White House. Clearly a tariff believer, once said it was his favourite word. The problem is, though, it could trigger recession in America, the inflationary aspects of this. What is he now expecting to happen?
What a great question, Anna. I think he is expecting countries to come grovelling. I think he is expecting that they will feel that these tariffs are so high, that they are so damaging for them, that they will lower their own and that they will try and level the playing field that way. I think what he's managed to do today is to hold everyone put everyone's eyes on the White House. It was striking that this Trump and the Trump administration, certainly the previous one, seen as being so leaky, leaked nothing on this. There was no sense really of precisely where Donald Trump would land. And I do think that is one of that has been one of the challenges for countries across the world, as they have seen this day approaching. They knew it was coming, but they didn't know quite what they would expect. They were trying to negotiate in the weeks up to today to try and make sure that they were not part of this list of countries globally who are now going to be tariffed at a minimum of 10%. But they never quite, the negotiations that they were having with the Trump administration were kind of speculative, because even Trump officials didn't have a clear sense of where their boss, where Donald Trump would land. From a British perspective, though, it is the case that Britain feels, maybe this is wishful thinking, but the British government feels that it is in a really good place, miles ahead of most, maybe all other countries, they would say, in terms of negotiating some sort of a trade deal with the United States. Now, what they were hoping was the best case scenario is that in the last few weeks they'd have got that trade deal, and they would have that would have left the UK off the list. But as we can see, the list is global. Although Russia, oddly, is not on that list. We're going to work out why in the hours ahead. Separate story, but fascinating nevertheless. But the list is pretty much global. Every country's on the list. So the real objective by the British government was to make sure they weren't on the list. It became very clear, I think, weeks ago, but some would say much more recently, that they were going to be on the list. They were going to be hit, because Donald Trump likes to seize the moment, his moment, make a big splash. And then from today will be the moment that offers, that bones that they have tried to throw, that the British government, and of course all others as well, have tried to throw to the Americans, that didn't work before today, that now those packages, those offers, and we know that the British government has put in place and put up front offers for Donald Trump, like lowering their own tariffs on American cars, like the digital services tax, all of that sort of stuff. There is a booklet of offers that they will now, with some speed, put to Donald Trump, to the Trump administration, to try and chip away at that 10% tax. But it is also factually the case that Britain is right down there at the bottom, 10%. That's as low as it goes, and I think the British government will take that on a very difficult day as a win.
Yes, fascinating. And just on that digital services tax, the prospect of it being, lost altogether or scaled back. One Northern Ireland MP, Claire Hanna, said at a time when big tech has grown fat by corrupting our politics and preying on our young people, is it the wrong approach to pander to his bullying tactics and protect tech billionaires? So there might be some pushback in the House of Commons on that. Mark, we've had reaction too from the UK Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds. We will always act in the best interests of UK businesses and consumers. That is why throughout the last few weeks, the government has been fully focused on negotiating an economic deal with the United States that strengthens our existing fair and balanced trading relationships. We have a range of tools at our disposal. We will not hesitate to act. We will continue to engage with UK businesses, including on their assessment of the impact of any further steps we take. The car industry has given its response. The announcement imposition of a 10% tariff on all UK products exported to the US, while less than other major economies, is another deeply disappointing and potentially damaging measure. And the Conservatives too, Andrew Griffith, Shadow Trade Secretary, saying this is disappointing news which will worry working families across the country. Labour failed to negotiate with President Trump's team for too many months after the election, failed to keep our experienced top trade negotiator, and failed to get a deal to avoid the imposition of these tariffs by our closest trading partner. But the point you're making, effectively, that this is a maximalist position as laid out by the transactional Donald Trump. It is effectively the high watermark to allow negotiations to continue.
Yes, I think so. I think it is. And the other point to make is that obviously, naturally, we've been focusing globally on the global reaction. But of course, there is huge reaction domestically as well. Just prior to this announcement, Chuck Schumer, the minority leader on Capitol Hill, Democrat, of course, said today Donald Trump will take a sledgehammer to the American economy and to the American dream. With the flick of a pen, and we saw that pen signing it, he is set to unleash reckless tsunami of tariffs. Prices will rise on medicines, cars, homes, appliances, metals, paper, beer, lumber, fertilizer and more. And then he goes on to say, and Trump, he couldn't care less. And there he is quoting Donald Trump, where he said that he couldn't care less if auto prices, if car prices rise because of the tariffs. You know, Anna, as we were watching Trump make that announcement, the audience there behind that front row, behind the cabinet members there, were blue-collar workers, defined by their hard hats, a select few who were invited here to the Rose Garden. I couldn't help thinking about many blue-collar workers who I've met on both the campaign trail in 2016 and the campaign trail in 2020. Back in 2016, so many of them were promised by Donald Trump that in his first presidency he would reopen the factories, that the steel mills would reopen, and that he would make America prosperous again back then. Well, they were left disappointed last time. Now, of course, the open question, or the argument, I should say, is whether they were left disappointed because Donald Trump was not able to realize the maximalist extent of what he wanted to do because he was, barriers were put in his way, or whether it was because it simply doesn't work. Now he is unleashing full throttle Trump, full throttle economics, Trumpian economics. We will see whether it works.
Yes, certainly the cry of those left behind by failing industries and globalisation, answered now apparently for them by this president. Mark, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Well, I'm joined now by Gerard Baker, editor-at-large at the Wall Street Journal. Great to see you. For some, this is an act of economic vandalism. For others, it's the start of making America wealthy again. What do you reckon?
Well, Anna, we're going to have to see exactly what happens next, OK? Because he's announced these tariffs. They're measured against tariffs that are supposedly, or tariffs and non-tariff barriers that are erected against the United States and these other countries around the world. And there'll be a lot of questions about some of those non-tariff barriers that amount to the numbers that he's given. The question, though, is, is this real? Are they actually going to impose these tariffs on this level? I just did a quick calculation. The four biggest countries or trading blocs with which the United States does business are China, Canada, Mexico, and the European Union. And between those four countries alone, they account for more than half of US imports, well over $1.5 trillion dollars worth of imports. And those between them are going to see tariffs of around 20, somewhere between 20 and, in the case of China, in effect, over 50%. That's an enormous sum of money which essentially is taxes that Americans are going to have to pay. The question is that going to happen, or is this intended to let those other countries get a signal that they need to make some changes, some big changes, and we're going to probably see a flurry of diplomatic activity, I suspect, in the next week before those tariffs actually come into effect. But let me just say this, Anna, and of course, this is really, as you say, a big, serious blow to an attacks on American consumers. But I do think if Trump is serious about it, and he does seem to be, it does show you the extent to which he is prepared to go to remake the American economy. This is an economy that has obviously been very successful over the last 50 years, but it has seen its industrial base essentially decline. Let me give you one statistic. In the last year, China produced 1,000 ships, 1,000 new ships. In the same year, the United States produced five new ships. A lot of those ships, obviously, for commercial use, but many of them also for military use. This is a real attempt, I think, by Donald Trump, whether you like it or not, to remake the American economy, and knowing that it's going to be painful. It's already been painful in terms of the damage we've seen in the stock market, people's investments. If these tariffs really go through, exactly as you've heard, this is going to result in really significant additional costs for American consumers, American farmers, American businesses, as well, of course, as businesses around the world. And it will be a real test of Donald Trump, whether or not he really is serious, that he's prepared to tolerate those. But I think as it stands, we have to say this is a president who's decided to remake the American economy, and probably in the course of things, if he goes through with it, remake the world economy, even if it costs significant amounts in the US economy in the short term, and indeed to his popular support. So it's a really big, bold, dramatic, high-risk move, but it does have as its ultimate aim remaking the American economy.
Yes, just had a reaction actually from the Irish Taoiseach Michael Martin. Ireland believes in open and free trade and that the imposition of tariffs is bad for the world economy. I deeply regret the US decision to impose 20% tariffs on imports from across the European Union. We see no justification for this. More than 4.2 billion euros worth of goods and services are traded between the EU and the US daily. Disrupting this deeply integrated relationship benefits no one. They've talked about their pharmaceutical industry, as has India, for example. Generic medicines, according to the US FDA, 9 out of 10 prescriptions in the US are generic medicines. That's a really strong area for India. India exports half of its generic medicines to America. The American people will be paying more for their cancer and diabetes drugs. Do they realise that, do you think? People tariffs are not popular. People polling that's been done here ask people, do they support these tariffs? Something like 2/3 of Americans say they don't, and including even significant numbers of Republicans. So they know what's coming. Look, I think one thing that may have to happen here is that Donald Trump may, if he does go ahead with these tariffs, and because as we talked about this short-term damage that there's no question that there will be, he may have to pursue other economic policies, which he's already planning to do, of course, with tax cuts, that will help and that will protect Americans from the impact, the short-term impact of these tariffs. So we may see, by the way, remember this happened in his first term in 2017 to 2021 when he imposed tariffs on China. That led to huge pain for American farmers in particular, who imported a lot of their agricultural needs from China, and saw a lot of their exports to China hit by retaliatory exports, and they had to end up subsidizing American farmers with significant funds from the US government. So yeah, there's no question there's going to be a cost. There's no question that he's going to have to respond to that cost. I mean, I would just say one thing, and I just heard what you were talking about with Mark there with Britain. I mean, you could argue that Britain's favorable 10% rate compared with the EU is a 10 percentage point dividend on Brexit. That Britain would be subject to a 20% tariff if Britain was still in the EU. Now it's only going to be 10%, and who knows, there may be further negotiations to come there which will reduce that. But look, yeah, the impact on Americans, all of the goods that you've talked about, whether it's drugs, whether it's agricultural products, whether it's cars, all of these things, and they can't immediately be replaced. I mean, that's the other thing, we know that. I mean, Donald Trump's plan is to replace a lot of those overseas products with domestically made American products. That can happen, but it won't happen in the next month, 6 months, even a year or two. So yeah, there's going to be pain, and that's the question, I think, is whether or not Donald Trump is really, as he seems to be, and he's repeatedly said this, we will have to take some pain here in the United States in order to make these changes. And now we're going to see whether or not he is prepared to follow through on that. And just very quickly, Gerald, because I'm running over, he extolled the virtues of making money from tariffs from 1789 to 1913. You know, that was where America got its money from. You know, is it his idea to do away with income tax, make money from tariffs, but thus blowing up the economic world order?
He certainly believes that. Of course, it was a very different economy back in those days. The role of government was tiny back in the early days of the United States, even right up until 1913. So you didn't need that much money, and tariffs could produce it. But look, this is also a little bit contradictory with what he proposes. I mean, if on the one hand he wants to bring American production back to America, that presumably means the tariffs. What's going to happen is Americans are going to import much less, and therefore they're not going to pay as much in the tariff. So you can't have it both ways. You can't actually expect to generate huge amounts of revenue from tariffs and at the same time have Americans shift their consumption patterns towards domestic production rather than international production. But we will see. It certainly isn't going to generate anything like the revenue that it used to in 150 years ago for the United States.
Gerard Baker, editor-at-large at the Wall Street Journal. Thank you very much indeed. And certainly this does appear to be a president now fighting the interwoven global supply chains developed since the end of the Second World War, in large part by America. Gerard, thank you.